close this because it'll give us, what's that word? Feedback. But I just want to make sure it's live before I close it. So one sec.
What are you closing?
Oh, YouTube this because it'll give us just that. It did it. It gave us the feedback.
Got it.
Yeah, so beautiful. Oh, and once again, I had these handy little questions that I wanted to weave through, and I left them on my desk. So I might grab those in a minute, but I wanted to where you are because I don't remember where you're located.
Well, obviously from Canada originally, but I've been traveling around the world quite a bit in the last 5 years and have been in Los Angeles kind of more recently for the last 4 or 5 months. So
Okay, that's what I was trying to nail
California.
down.
Yeah. I know it's hard to nail me down. That's the problem. Yeah.
I realize my little AirPods aren't working. I'm gonna not use them unless my neighbor's background noise feels too. Do you hear it?
No, not at all.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
They're doing some kind of magic. So yeah, so let me go grab my paper real quick.
Sure.
I know we're already live, but we're just keeping it casual. I am excited to talk to you because of all the things that you kind of like mix in with relationships. We're both projectors. We love I think, art of intimacy and going deeper with people. We have the creative background. You have the photography. So I just feel like there's so much to get into. But this is like I think it's been the Wealthy Creative now for a month that we've been wrapping and rolling. And every time I do it, I'm like, oh, I have these fun little questions I want to incorporate. And then I never come to the call with the actual questions. So I'm like, get the questions.
Okay, get the questions. Yeah. We'll hang here.
Okay, cool.
That was fast.
Yeah, I knew it would be simple. I just am like, dadgummit, I took the time to write my cute little questions down. The least I can do is use them.
Is bring them. Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, so one of the questions that I think would be so fun to hear from you, because we've been crossing paths for a while, but I've never gotten the backstory of kind of how you got into your soul work, your genius expression. And I think you said you've been doing this for like 4 or 5 years, or is it longer than that?
Oh man, it's been an evolution, I'll tell you that much. I feel like I was born into the complete opposite of what I'm living now. Every worst case scenario, trauma ridden anything, that is what my little being just wanted to be plopped into. So anything and everything from extreme poverty, all sorts of abuse, not being provided with environments that were going to be conducive to any sort of enhancement or growth in my life, and just having this sheer knowing and capacity within myself to know that that's not the way that life was meant to be. And it was really challenging as I was navigating my early years because I was surrounded by family members and people who had a very different lens of what life should be, can be, and will be. And there was just something inside of me. I mean, I always equated to God because it's this unknowing energy that kind of streams through you that kind of kept this guiding force in knowing that what I was experiencing, I didn't actually have to experience. So when people ask me, how did I land in my soul work? What it really came down to is in stepping away from what I was presented with in life, afforded me a very deep relationship with God, first of all, but also the courage to do things differently. And then that also came with a lot of that outsiderness feel, and also feeling like there was no one among me that really felt this way and really understood what it was about. And as I've kind of walked this trajectory, my life has always been about experiential things. So if there was something I hadn't done before, there was a curiosity to know, is this possible? Can I go here? What do I do? And every time I approached life that way, new elements would always pop in to kind of support where I wanted to go. And then I started to realize that that potential is limitless, but our human sides and the sides that are heavily programmed can't quite get there. But everything in my life led me to a place of people advisory, creating from nothing, and exploring life in a very deep felt lens.
Mm-hmm.
which isn't always the good stuff. Sometimes it's the bad stuff that provides like the most exquisite
Contrast.
experience. Exactly. And so the people aspect of it, where I became more of a formal mentor and started working with people with their things, really only happened in like 2018. But
Okay.
before that, I was in like a high level HR position. So I've always been
Okay.
around people. And then business was another really big interest of mine. I would get into all these positions, growing up in corporations, and I would make those positions amazing. I would write the manual for it and I'd be like, what's next? So like I was
Yeah.
always just kind of wanting to evolve and experience as much as I could. And what I've realized is that has really given me the ability to work with people and help them land in their own being. And having a sight of the world, which I know you feel the same way as a projector, which is just a little further ahead to kind of draw people out into different experiences, which again, only very recently in the last year or two have I really landed in understanding what I actually do, because it's
Yeah.
been so abstract. That's the art of life. It's not like a clean little box that you can just tick off and go, did that. And any time I did that, it was so unnatural. So
Yeah, and I think that's the beautiful thing about like the photography piece makes me think of the lens
mm,
that you're looking through and
yeah.
being a projector and just how much you see with that just natural way of being, it's seeing, right? And then
Yep.
it's like in a way that I appreciate you sharing your journey just because I didn't know really when the coaching aspect kind of got woven in. But similar
Yeah.
to you, I always find it a really funny question, almost an unanswerable question
Yeah.
when
Yeah.
people ask me when did you get into this work? I'm like, well, it kind of feels like the womb. Like there
Yeah. Yeah.
like I have
Absolutely.
some
Yeah.
experiences of
Yeah.
like going into that, energetic space and realizing like what was happening through childhood, very young adult, and like all of that influenced. And when you have that connection, like literally to your soul in that way, it's a
Yeah.
very different explanation, if you will, versus a linear, well, on my resume, it says that I did this, this,
Right.
this.
Well, and you're exactly right. When people say like, how did you become a coach or a mentor? Or, like, how did you build businesses? I agree that it's not like I came out of high school and was like, I want to be a whatever. That was never who I was as an individual. But people have always been coming to me
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
for wisdom, for advice, to show them a better way, to give them the ability to see themselves beyond where they exist. Like forever since I was young, like
Yeah.
young, um, which I can attribute that to sometimes being, trauma driven, because you
Sure.
become very acutely aware of everything around you and the shift in people's energies. But I feel like it shows me I didn't really choose it. And if the ask later in life was to shift again, I would, because I'm here for the ultimate experience, not the one that somebody carves out for me per se.
Yeah, and isn't that interesting? Because it's like it's two different modes of operating. I guess one you could say is more like ego driven versus soul driven, because um I'm thinking of this book. There's a book, Strength to Strength, and it's
Mm,
like it's kind of it makes me think of like the ascent, in your career, and then sometimes there's a descent, and it doesn't have to look that way, but that's kind of like sometimes a traditional trajectory. And
yeah,
and I think about this strength to strength where actually it doesn't need to be this little bell, upside down bell thing, but it
yeah, like the
actually,
peaks and valleys. Hmm.
right. It's more so like when we're talking about it as a creative process, it's more like the energy was done there. There was a life cycle to that. And now my soul wants a different experience. And of course, we're always bringing threads of that previous,
Of
whether it's
course.
HR, photographer, coach, whatever it may be, those hats
Yeah,
that we wear are just that. They're hats that we wear, but your being, your projectorness, your wisdom, all of that goes no matter what role you're
exactly.
in. Yeah.
Yeah. Which has
Awesome.
made life really fun, and I think when people look at the peaks and valleys, I think it's the association and the perception of those peaks and valleys and how they feel and the comfort level of where you're at.
Mm-hmm.
And as that has been more regulated in my life, I can't perceive one or the other as being good, bad, wrong, right,
Mm-hmm.
because it's all in support of what I'm doing and where I'm going. It's the intangible things that you can't actually equate to a formula until you've landed in
Yeah.
whatever it is that you're moving towards. But it's a discipline that I didn't even realize I was carrying until I could see it.
Yeah. Isn't that neat? The
Yeah.
projector's life is to get to that, like between, I think, 40 to 50 years old, so they can actually see themselves. Like
Right,
they
right,
get
right,
they
right.
spend the first half of their life seeing everyone else and all these things that could be done differently and how to make it amazing. And then finally they're like, oh yes, that's me. I see everything.
Yes, yes, exactly. The acceptance is like the biggest part. So it's really cool to, I mean, it shouldn't ever take that long. I feel like we're moving into a place where we don't necessarily have the luxury to be, you know,
I don't think it
putzing
will.
around. No, I
Yeah.
think it's moving into a place where people are like, oh, this doesn't have to stay this way. Oh, I can be a part of something different. Oh, yeah, there's just so many
And just
realizations
all
that
the
are happening.
generational things too, all the
Yeah,
trauma
they're starting to shift. Yes.
like the generations younger than us seem to be having way less of that to shed so
Oh,
that they
they're
can,
so smart. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
they're like
yeah.
dancing in their soul stuff sooner, which is
Yes,
really,
yes.
it's really cool to watch.
I agree. I agree.
So I will bring my next question.
Perfect.
Yeah, so I love that you're talking about, actually a question emerged off the page,
Okay.
but
Yes, yes.
it's like one of the things you're talking about how fun it is, and that's been my experience too. And at
Yeah,
the same time, there's also this contrast of periods when I didn't let it be fun. And
totally.
that being like some of the thickest conditioning to get
That's
through.
true.
So
Hmm.
I'm really curious about your experience with that, and like what's been the most helpful for you kind of getting to the place of letting it be fun, even when there's contrast, because that's very hard for a lot of people, the whole adage, make lemons out of lemonade, but like that literally is a skill. And I think people with trauma are some of the most resourceful people. So I
100%.
I personally like, it's a bittersweet thing. I don't thank my trauma, but I thank my trauma, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah, yeah, totally. I have a love-hate relationship with trauma. I'm like, I see what it does to propel people. I also see how many people don't ever get there. And then that makes me really bad because there isn't enough depth in what I see content-wise and what's being put into the world that is nuanced enough to really cater to a human being versus what everybody thinks life should look like and how it feels. But in those thick times for me, I think what I have learned to lean into is, I've lived enough life on this planet to know that everything I've ever wanted to do has come to pass. So even though I can't see where I'm going per se sometimes, or if I don't know if I'm in the right place, or it feels really icky, or I'm tired, or I can't quite rub two words together to make a post for business or whatever, I'm always reminded that I always get there. And
Mm-hmm.
so what I try to do is it's a more of a somatic experience at this
Mm-hmm.
point, which is to really understand that 9 to 10 times our emotions and the way that we feel in our body is an absolute liar. It is a pre-programmed past experience or future feared response to a specific situation. And to know that no matter where I've been in my life, there was always a certain amount of support in knowing that it was temporary
Mm.
or that it could be temporary.
Yeah.
And that I had a choice, which again, it comes down to a very specific level of discipline to either stay and permeate and allow that thing to take over, or to be and to continue to be and to continue to walk. And like, you get signals all the time. And I
Mm-hmm.
think when we get wrapped up in the discomfort of those things, that's what prolongs those periods, because we're no longer aware that it's part of the process. If you're going over here, a lot of the shit you have right now and who you are and what you're doing cannot come with you. So if you
Right.
cannot get comfortable in knowing that there is a certain level of stripping, there are things you're not going to understand, there is a chaos that doesn't have to feel chaotic,
Mm-hmm.
but
Mm.
most certainly exists
Yep.
as you move to different places. And it's this double-edged sword in the sense that it's like, I want to be this. Well, if you want to be that, then that can't come with.
Right. Yeah.
Or if,
It's yeah, there's
yeah,
like just listening to you talk, it's making me think about energetic blueprints and like what people are coded with. And so going back to this trauma conversation that we don't want, like to your point, it's nuanced, right? And so
it
we don't
is.
completely ignore it, because then there's a certain amount of spiritual bypassing and it doesn't actually shift the
Exactly.
body. And at the same time, we
Exactly.
don't want to perseverate and ruminate there. So it's this very like
It's
sweet.
delicate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so for that reason, self included, a lot of times I just avoid writing about it, because it's like it's so nuanced that it's the kind of thing you want to have a conversation with about, like
Yeah.
with your clients and the people that you're going to support. And so going back to these blueprints and these codes, it's like, because of the trauma, in a sense, there's already this capacity where it doesn't even have to be like a discipline, like it doesn't have to require any kind of ego content
Yeah.
or thought process. It's just like,
Yeah.
this is just who I am. Like I
Yeah.
survive, and then I move from survival to what do I want? Like that's just, it's like this automatic
Yeah.
thing that happens.
Yeah.
And I know for me, I just took that for granted. I just thought that's how people
I
live.
know.
I
I
didn't
know.
realize
I
that people
know.
didn't stop to, and I realized that that came from a lot of like what therapists would call low distress tolerance. Like it was a gift, because there's always a genius in everything. It was
Everything. Yeah.
a gift to just be like intolerant of whatever the situation was. It was just like, absolutely not. Like that's not happening. So whatever we have to do, we're doing that.
Exactly.
And then that becomes this way of being that shows up for these micro ways, like, whether it's your business or your relationship, it'll just be like this little kernel.
Yeah.
And it's small, but it's like, yeah, that's not to my taste. So,
Yeah.
so flip it, and then flip it fast. And I think that's been my experience too. And so I'm curious, like, this is a question that I guess I'm leaning into. I don't even know that I've asked it of myself before,
Oh,
where it
okay.
is that when that's happening, like when we're, what's the word? Mm, not having fun, right? Like when we're not having fun, even though there might be contrast. And I think it is something that I've answered before, but I see it coming up again, where it's just like, we're just taking ourselves way too seriously in that moment, like way
Yeah.
too seriously. And that actually kills that, if we're talking about creativity or art or photography or whatever, you don't want to take that so seriously that you're like squelching the life out of it.
Well, it shifts you from really connecting to being in the mind and trying to articulate something you don't understand. That takes infinitely longer. And
Mm-hmm.
it's not fun because you don't have all the pieces. So
Right.
it's like we try to outsmart our own capacity, which is massive. And it's funny because, so like, I have found that the playfulness has come back in understanding that, again, this is weird lingo, but it always works out. Like it does. It doesn't matter how long it takes you, it always works out.
Mm-hmm.
And then leaning into that. And when I say discipline, it's not the mental, it's
Right.
literally about
The
being
being.
able to take a pause and be like, oh, I feel kind of shitty today. And like, why am I doing that? And like it takes it out of your body into a perception so that you can command something different. But
Right.
most people don't have that degree of separation. And it's interesting that you say that, you didn't understand this wasn't natural for everyone. This is who I was as a child. Like I
Right.
remember very distinctly, it's an example of my mother, who all of the women or people in my familial generational lineup always had medical issues, tons of medical issues. And I remember her sitting me down one day and telling me all these things that I was going to have because all the women in every generation had had these before me. And I remember as a kid looking at her with the most perplexed look on my face and being like, yeah, not me. Like, why would I? Like, I was like, I'm not doing that. Like, that sounds terrible.
Yeah.
And to this point, I have never had a major illness because it was a like you said, an intolerance
Yeah.
of what was being presented to me. But when we're so wrapped up in the mind physical connection to our experience, which can take over, and there's nothing wrong with that, like we're human. At the end of the day, there's going to be moments when things are not peachy keen, but there are ways to land again and land again and land again and not torment yourself in the process. But some things are, I think you mentioned earlier, are just a little deeper than others, you know? Like some people are really great at making money. Other people are really great at being in love. Some people are really good at, but then they have the other facets that they haven't quite wrapped their head
Sure.
around, you know?
Yeah.
So that's why everybody, and I know you lean into more intimacy side of this kind of work anyways. It's like you can't just follow a bunch of people's thought processes on a specific niche and figure it out. Like it's so much deeper than that. And
It's so unique to each
it
person.
is based on your makeup, like you said, the coding and what's been kind of weird throughout your life. So the fun has come back because when you really start to see reality for what it is and kind of see your contribution, then it kind of becomes a game and it's hilarious because you're like, oh, that's why it didn't work. But you just
Yeah, and
get
it is,
better at doing it. Yeah.
and it is quite comical, like how
It
you
is
keep
funny.
hiding those pieces from
Yes.
yourself.
Yes.
There was something you were saying that was really poignant about discipline and it not being from your mind. And I think that's
Yeah.
something that's very challenging. And we're in a period of history where it's more important than ever for people
Oof.
to recognize that devotion and
Mm.
discipline are different. And we're using the word discipline, but really I think what we're talking about is devotion. Like we're devoted to
Yep.
having a better experience
Yeah.
for ourselves. So
Yeah.
we're not interested in just staying here or the status quo or coasting or whatever. And people get really confused and do the like mental discipline
The
thing
mentalizing.
where
Mm-hmm.
they're pushing and forcing and like making themselves show up for something that they're
Sure.
really not interested in. And that's
Yep.
actually in so many ways, ruining for the work that you do, like your relationships and your romance. And that's not going to work or be a satisfying long-term experience. And my work, it's like people doing that in the realm of business, and then they're just
Yeah.
constantly trying to put themselves in, to use your word, the niche box. And
Yep.
that's not necessarily what their soul is calling for either. So there's a
No.
lot of stripping down that needs to happen. And I know in my experience and the work that I do with clients too, it's like it doesn't have to be this like really long arduous process. It's like just
Nope.
cultivating that muscle of, like, you use the word pause, the pause of, is this really what I want? Like, is it like
Yeah.
just a 5-second thing,
Yeah.
and the
But we
permission
we
to
don't
flip
do
it.
that. But most people don't do that because they're looking for the result.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so when you're just focused on the result, whatever it is, you're missing the most important relationship, which is your orientation to it,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
spiritually, mentally, physically, and intangibly in the world.
Yep.
I always think it's spirit first because, like, where the hell does it come from? But also, why do you want the things that you want?
Yep.
Do you really want to be a millionaire? Do you know what that comprises of? Do you know the like you don't? I think
Mm-hmm.
most of the things we want in life, when you really strip it down, it's very simple. There's not a lot that
It is.
people really want, but you're told to want what you want. You are marketed every day to want a specific life. And then when you get there and you're like, ooh, but nobody takes the time to cultivate that relationship. But that was my superpower coming in, is I didn't have anybody to tell me no.
Mm.
So I could
Yeah.
just be like constantly, which was
Yeah, that
great.
was
But
my
yeah,
experience too, about not really having the no and the boundaries. But you said something in there that caught my attention that was really good.
sure.
There was like yeah, so I don't think enough people pause to ask,
Yeah,
if they really want something.
yeah.
And at the same time, this is like where I think it's double-edged sword, I think, is like sometimes they actually really do want the thing, but not the how they're creating it.
Yes,
And that part, that like is a really important piece, because
it
to your
is.
point, they're like so focused on the outcome that they're not enjoying the process, which is
Which
just a
is the
fast path
best
to burnout.
part. Yeah,
Yeah.
but it's also the best part. And so, we talk about my work being relationship rooted. Well, it's the whole relational experience. It's not just about love and relationships with other people. Um, Being an experiential person, I'm relishing in the moments, even the ones that are uncomfortable, even when I
Mm.
don't know what's going on. I'm always seeing the beauty around me. That's my lens. like I'm a perpetual love seeker. That's me. But I I think people are so quick to try to get to, I mean, that's the world we've been presented with. Everything happens like this. And it can,
It
you know
can,
that
yeah.
it can. It can
Yep.
happen in a flash, like
Right.
laughably a flash, but it can't when you're trying to control it.
Right. Yeah. And that's the stripping down piece, right? Like
Yeah, yeah.
that's the every layer of control is taking you closer and closer to like what we've called homecoming, right? Like just
Yeah,
coming
homecoming.
back into
Yeah,
ourself. And
yeah.
in that place, there's literally nothing better. So then the opportunities have I say opportunities, but even the physical 3D thing that you may have a taste for has an
Hmm.
opportunity to fall in.
To come in. Hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I'm
Yeah.
excited to hear, knowing all of this and kind of the backstory and the journey and such, like what is really super alive in your work and life and sphere at this time. Cause I know it's probably been a couple of years since we've passed, crossed paths and seen each
Yeah.
other. And I've seen very cool things from intensives where you include the photography to pieces. I think I'm remembering that
Yeah.
correctly, which is
Pieces.
your kind of your biannual, I think, program.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
And so I know, like me, you're just following the what's alive and what's true and the creative edge, and it ends up weaving together beautifully and the artistry of it versus this like
Always.
I have to be in this box. So I'm very curious to hear what's alive for you and unfolding and what you're up to.
Yeah. So, I mean, my work has shifted over the last 5 years from being male oriented exclusively, going into working more exclusively with women. Relationships has been really hot for me because I feel like we've seen and are going to continue to see evolutions in the way relationships present themselves and the way that they're being shown to the world. So obviously we went through a phase of kind of a gender war that still remains to be seen, but you're starting to see more actual true pairings coming into form, which really is going to set the stage for what's to come. But I truthfully believe that women lead that stronghold.
Mm-hmm.
And not in the sense that they're responsible for the greater large, but there's been a contribution in the way women show up in relationships that has not allowed the evolution to really take
Yeah.
hold. And
Yeah.
so what I'm seeing is, at least in my space, a lot of women who've traveled far and wide in their lives, personally, professionally, and spiritually, but they still can't anchor down love.
Yeah. Yeah. Cause
And
it's
love
that
is not,
final stripping down of control.
it is. And like, that's part of my language, my motherfucking powerhouse. Like, love
Mm-hmm.
has been my core through everything. And so what's been fun is to start working with women who that edge where it's like they've done everything, but they haven't quite connected to it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Muse is something that came out earlier this year, which is really about taking those beautifully architectured women who have really created something special in their lives, not just in specific niches, but they can't quite physically see themselves or I think you said earlier, even see how they're creating. And so
Mm-hmm.
there's been a real ask for me to sit with those women for longer durations of time and really clean up some of these creative potencies and proficiencies because the people I'm working with right now, they know things like they're not stupid. They weren't born yesterday. They've gone through great amounts of transformation, and you probably deal with this too with your clients. Like they just don't see themselves, and when you
Mm-hmm.
connect those pieces, something happens, and then it like ripples out into their entire world, and they have such massive presence that I think that the more we touch women like that,
Yeah.
then the evolution of the way relationships and love will show up in life will look exponentially different. So I've also incorporated the photography and videography in that because any client I've ever taken on a journey with me where I've had the opportunity to like photograph them kind of within weeks of working together and then the months following,
Mm-hmm.
they don't even look the same. It's
Mm.
like they undergo a full shift. And I don't know, there's something really beautiful about a woman who really understands herself, her expression, the way that she shows up in the world, and really owning, that's not the right word, because it's not an
Embodying it.
attachment thing. Embodied. And my work is heavily embodied. But it also took me some time to land in a place where I was actually living that way. And I feel like I'm finally in stride with that. So the work has been very potent, fast paced, not from an achievement standpoint, but it's like there's no bullshit business happening between. And I'm also just seeing a lot of these women pair up with really exquisite men. Like,
It's beautiful.
pinch me kind of love, and not the fairy tale kind. It's not that these women don't face things with these men, but just the demeanor of who they come when there's this other energetic presence in the room that's just anchoring the experience.
Well,
I'm
now,
seeing
yeah, they're
that
finally in
they're
a
free.
space to
Yeah.
receive, right? Like
Yes,
their
exactly.
capacity to receive has shifted. Yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
So, are the women that you're talking about, are they primarily entrepreneurs, or do you find that you attract a wide range, or how does that look for you?
So a lot of them have been high level entrepreneurs,
Mm,
not by like any, it's just the people that I'm working with right now. I feel like every woman, regardless of level, carries this potential. So it doesn't matter if they have a bajillion dollars. But I think from a pace perspective, there's a
mhm.
certain baseline that you possess when you have certain things that you've already been through. I am noticing that these women have erred on the side of hyper independence, codependency, not having a deep degree of self understanding and worth. But
Mhm.
it's a very easy switch for me because I was all of those things as well.
Sure, sure. Yeah,
So
that makes
I
sense.
carried a lot of those threads, and I look at them and I'm like, you're there. You
Yeah.
just need to see. And we like turn the key and they're like, I didn't even know. And it's just this magical, I don't know. I'm excited. But I also think that towards the end of the year and into next, working with men will come back on the table, because I think that we're moving into a place where we actually do need each other to
Mhm.
experience a different type of relational landscape. And I think that the walls and the guards are starting to soften a little bit, now that everybody's had their rebellious moment and I'm a woman,
And
I'm a
some are
man.
still
Yeah.
having it. Yeah.
I know. Somewhere I'm just like, you have some time to go. But I think it's moving and it's exciting. And yeah, that's really live for me at this point. And the photography aspect is really just to allow for people. I love that you said that there's something about the photography aspect and the lens that you see from, because the biggest feedback is people didn't think they could see themselves that way when I present them with their work,
Yeah. Yeah. I
because of
mean,
how I see.
I
Yeah.
think it's a very potent offer. Like I don't
Yeah.
have a photography skill in me outside of I've done like my own little photo shoot from time to time when we were
Yeah.
locked
Yeah.
down
Just to
and
have.
COVID,
Yeah.
but
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't have the my dog wants to join the call.
That's
I don't
cute.
have
Yeah. Hi.
the photography lens eye naturally. And so whenever I do work with a photographer that has like a deep level of embodiment, I'm always really touched by it. Like it's really
Yeah.
incredible. So I love the integration of, your art and your natural gift and all of that. One of the things,
Yeah.
since this is the wealthy creative, that I was
Sure.
curious about is because you have this you use the word opulence before, and there's
Yeah.
this understanding I think that you have, even though we haven't touched on it with words, which is wealth being more than money. And yet, in my experience, when I help clients with their relationships, they're also that translates into the energetics of wealth
Always.
building. So
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
wonder, like you're attracting people for the relationship elements, but my sense is that this is affecting their business or their work or their, their relationship with wealth too.
Yeah. It took me a long time to land in a place where I was comfortable niching down. I mean, that's what people call it in the business world, niching down to one thing specific. But my whole aptitude is the relational experience, which is everything. You can't have a healthy relationship with other people if you don't have a healthy, sound relationship with your body and mind. You can't have a booming business if your mind is filled and inundated with your relationships or the obsession of relationships. You can't have a relationship with creativity if you're constantly thinking about whether or not what you're doing is. So all of it's related.
Yep.
So yes, for me, and I came from nothing, like probably less than nothing. And the only thing that felt wealthy to me was the experience of life. It was so rich because it didn't matter what I was doing and what I had and who I was doing it with. I was going to experience something.
Mm.
And I feel like because of that, my life has been provided for in a way that didn't and wouldn't have made sense to any predecessor or generational person in my line because it
Mhm.
wasn't possible for them. But wealth to me is in relationships,
Yeah. Yeah.
and they
I
do
think,
impact everything. They do. You can be the most impervious, strong-headed human being and still be impacted by relationships. And when that shifts sideways, or when you're sideways, and more often than not, it's you. It's not
mm,
really anybody else half the
for sure.
time. When you start to really get a stronghold in that, you can't lose. And the abundance just keeps coming, and it can go, the abundance can also be terrible things, like, but you're always the denominator or the contributing factor to
To
it.
clarify that for the people that
Yeah.
catch the live or replay, you're meaning there can be a wealth of like uh drama. Oh,
Oh,
we've got
wow.
balloons.
Wow. Surprise. That was amazing. Yes,
That's an
okay.
Apple thing. I don't know what to say about that other
That
than
was
there's
the
a
best.
wealth of balloons.
There's a celebration we didn't even know we were having.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you mean like an abundance of drama is what I heard
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
if you're a contributing factor to why your relationships are not going well, then you can have an abundance of really bad hardship and lots of lessons that you never make it through because you are not even looking where you need to be looking. Or you can look at the things and start actually taking the steps that you avoid 9 out of 10 times, and it might be uncomfortable initially because it's uncomfortable because it's not what you
Yeah.
know. And then that leads you to an abundance of a whole new experience you never thought you could have.
Yeah. And there's like a what's the word? Delineation, if you will, between drama and fallout. Because I
Totally.
notice like there's a
100%.
when there's a conditioning, like a trauma conditioning of basically toxic shame or there's something wrong
Yes.
with you, what
Yeah.
will happen is the conditioning will get a hold of the conditioning and
Yes.
then
They'll make
and
a
then
baby
try
and
to
it'll be, yeah.
yeah, and it
Yeah.
just like
Yeah.
it's a little self-deprecating in that way.
Yes.
And so what can
Yes.
happen is you're having fallout because you're actually making the moves that are
That
creating, you
create
know,
fallout. Yeah.
yeah, like this person doesn't want to have anything to do with you anymore if you're not going to support them in their codependency, or this person, you know, like whatever the
Yeah.
example is,
Yeah.
it'll
Yeah.
create fallout. But if there's still that conditioning, like the toxic shame part, then somebody can be asking like, why is this happening to me?
To
When
them.
really,
Uh-huh.
yeah, when really that breakup or that fallout or whatever is like a huge gift
Yeah.
in the opening that you now will have to receive.
Well, and I think that that's, again, devotion is such a huge part of devotion is a discipline in that you have to be able to look at what's happening and in the midst of not knowing why it's happening,
Mm-hmm.
trust, which is the hardest thing for people. And I really like what you said there because I don't think a lot of people who have had extenuating circumstances for a prolonged period of time understand they play a part in that. And it's usually a pretty big part. And
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I can watch a train about to crash 5 million miles away. But if that person doesn't see the train about to crash, they're going to crash the train. Like, it is what it
Yep.
is.
Yep.
But the devotion to knowing that little nuanced piece, which it is a practice. Like I would like to say I was always good at this, and I feel like when I was younger it was more natural, and then I grew up and had to go through a bunch of whatever
Stripping, yeah.
stripping. But it is our most natural state to follow the path of least resistance, but
Mm-hmm.
people misperceive the resistance as being incorrect because it feels shitty sometimes.
Yeah. So you may not know this about me, but I have a
Yeah,
background in chemical dependency therapy
it's
and
cool. Yeah, yeah,
counseling and
yeah.
that. So when I hear you speak about that, it automatically makes me think of post-acute withdrawal symptoms. You like, so somebody who's very unfamiliar, this is also a plug for mentorship, like why it's
Yeah,
so
yeah.
important to have mentorship,
Yes. Yes.
because there's no way that I could have gone through as much deconditioning as I have if I didn't have somebody saying like, you're supposed to feel like shit right now. Like I would have
There's
absolutely.
an ease in that. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah,
Yes. Yeah,
because
I
it's the
agree.
same way with someone who's going through chemical dependency and they go through
Yep.
those withdrawals. Your body is responding to the lack of the toxin. It
Yeah.
wants that. And the same way with our conditioning, like that has been what we created to feel safe. So removing that, and then there's this, fallout,
Yeah.
chaos, whatever you want to
Yeah.
call it. It's like
Yeah.
the mind can freak out
It
and think
can.
it shouldn't feel this way, that I must be making the wrong move, and want to go back to whether it's addictive relationship or,
Yep.
addiction to
Yep.
drug or social media or whatever the thing.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Um, so it's just, yeah, it's just really helpful to have people who've been through it when you are, you know, deconstructing, if you will.
Yep. And that can't ring truer. Like I would say most of what I learned in life, I did through life. Like I was not a big book reader. In my
Mm,
early years I did because that was all I could reach for. I didn't have anybody in my immediate world to support me in that way. But in learning how to receive and being able to understand that actually I don't have to do it all alone and by myself. And there
mm,
are actually people who are not better than me, but they actually can see for me so that I don't have to work so hard. And if I trust that they have my best interest and like want more for me or want to guide me in the direction I say I want to go,
mm.
then it's almost like I've got a little bit of a cheat beside me as I'm walking through. And you said something earlier about bypassing. When you're doing it by yourself, you want so badly to get to the other side that you skip so much because you're not allowing that full experience to really permeate your body.
Mm, yeah.
It's this displaced experience, and then you're never fully satisfied when you get there. But with mentorship, it gives you a place to say, I don't know what I'm doing. Why is this looking like this? Everything is falling apart. Am I going to be okay? I don't think it's worth it. And I'm like, when you came to me, you hated your entire experience and you thought you could just stay where you are. Like, I'm here,
Yeah.
we're good. Let's just keep going. And every day that passes, that mentorship just gives you, because, maybe this is not maybe so common. I think it's common, actually. I'm just going to say it. It's common. I feel like in ancestral years, tribes were obviously much smaller, but there was a hierarchy of knowledge and wisdom.
Right.
And
Yeah,
I
they're
think that
elders.
right. And there was an element of becoming a man or becoming a woman before you could enter into any of these sort of arenas. And I
Right. They're
think
rites of
that,
passage.
right. And there's a holistic nature to that because we're not always ready for the thing we say we want. Like no
Right.
matter how you shake it out, I was not ready to make the money that I'm making 8 years ago. I would not have been able to hold it, understand it, be with it. I was not able to have the relationships I wanted to have because I was not
Mm,
prepared. So with mentorship nowadays, I think more often than not in generations like past maybe our parents' age, where people were becoming a little bit more adept to kind of question and create differently, um, nobody has really had solid guiding figures in their life.
right. Yeah. And it's a really interesting topic, probably a whole other episode
Yeah, of course. Yeah,
because
yeah.
it's literally a US thing, and like
Sure.
a very I would venture to say like Western thing, not just US thing, but
Sure, sure.
Western thing.
Western
Because
ideology.
yeah, because it's like it really is that egocentric issue. And it's part
Yeah.
of why I know when we were messaging to book this call, we were talking about nature and reconnecting with nature. And like that was a really big foundation in my work as a therapist. I
Yeah,
was an
yeah,
eco
yeah.
art therapist and I was working with people in that way. And then, I took this kind of like detour because we were in COVID and offline and
Yeah, it was
online,
weird.
online, not
Yeah.
offline,
Yeah,
but
yeah. More
online.
on digital.
Yeah. And so there was this like coming back home, speaking of the homecoming, where it's like I'm really leaning into all the ways that our just systems in general are set up. And there's this mistrust that got
I think reinforced isn't the right word. It got brought to the surface where like
Yeah,
even in
yeah.
the coaching industry is a great
Uh-huh.
example of the macro. Like there is such a huge mistrust right now
Of
of
course.
people hiring mentors because it's like this wild, wild west where it's not a regulated profession.
Yeah.
And it's like showcasing what you're talking about, which is you weren't really getting that much mentorship from home because you're
Yep.
put into like, education system, public school, that kind
Yeah.
of thing.
Yeah.
And you just figure it out for yourself,
Figure out life. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, you
Yep.
just figure that out once you graduate. And so
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
all of a sudden people are like really hungry in this self-development,
Uh-huh.
personal development age.
Yes.
And it wasn't like coming from this indigenous, deeply like deep respect for the elders.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so
It
now
was
there's like,
gross.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
It's kind
so
of
now we're
gross. Yeah.
seeing that,
Yeah.
we're
Yeah.
seeing that lack of maturation
Yes.
that kind of took over. And I think people, so right now in this current era, we're like really, really seeing where it is that people are prioritizing listening to their intuition, cultivating the relationship with themselves, deepening their own knowing so that they can actually be empowered buyers. It doesn't make all of that experience wrong that people had, but it goes back to
Sure.
contrast. It
Yeah.
deepened their values. It showed them what they stand for. And so now people are maturing through that macro experience of
Yep.
like listening to other people more than they were listening to themselves. And
Yeah.
I think it's just it's a plug for the work we do, but not intentionally. But it's like
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
really support people to learn to connect with themselves deeper, to connect with that higher power, their source energy, so that they don't have to fall victim to whatever it is that feels, not as supportive to wealth, their wealthy creativity, their opulence, their all of the above, right?
Yeah. 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 I mean, I feel like it goes through stages because, if you think about the birthing baby and then the teenager and the rebellious young adult, I feel like every industry goes through that.
Yep.
And discernment is kind of a piece that not a lot of people are imparted with.
Mm.
And I think sometimes people even choose mentors that emulate past relationships because
Absolutely.
that's the type of support and consideration that they were given as human beings. It's
Yeah.
crazy. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
It's
crazy. But
interesting.
yeah, it's very
Uh,
interesting.
It's like, it's deeper. It's like really deeply interesting to me, the whole
Yeah,
topic,
me
because
too.
people
Yeah.
don't realize it, but unconsciously they are always choosing things to work out those patterns. And so like, I remember my very first internship as an art therapist and like looking around and I was like, how did I choose this? And then all of a sudden I had this like
Yeah.
eerie feeling
Yeah.
that the supervisor and the manager were like these replicas of my parents, and I was just like about to trip out because I'm like, am I in a simulation right now?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
ended up doing an independent study on it because I started seeing, like, as a relationship coach, you
Correlation.
probably
Hmm.
know the imago theory and imago
Yeah.
therapy.
Yeah.
It's like I saw that people are choosing workplace environments, coaching relation, like all of these things that are familiar. And then sometimes like it looks very like on the surface, it looks very
Yeah.
unfamiliar. But like if I
Yes.
think about the imago of my romantic partner, for example, he's like the combination of my mom, my dad, and my grandmother. Like you can see different traits,
Yeah, little inflections. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And then
Yeah.
like to have done the work that it's like that's beautiful. It's not like a trigger. It's not like an
No. Yeah.
abandonment or whatever the thing. It's just
Yeah.
like we're just always attracted to things that allow us to move closer and closer to ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting. When you talk about that theory, the other day, maybe it was a couple of weeks ago, I actually said, if I didn't have the life that I did, I don't know that I'd be a coach or a mentor. Like
Right.
you could be anything. This is
Yep.
why I say, like, a lot of times you don't know why you do the things that you do and what for. And I thought to myself, I'm like, oh, I could have been a singer, could have been anything. I love what I do and I do it every day, regardless of if money is coming my way or not. Like it's just a natural thing for me. But it's like you are a byproduct of your entire experience, which is
Oh
why
yeah.
shifting into different places almost requires a different line of sight. Not a better line of sight, not whatever, but just a very different vantage point. So you can be like, huh, I didn't think about it that way. But what I have found is that until somebody's able to receive counsel
Mm,
from a place of just that neutrality of like, oh, I didn't consider that, where it then
mm.
becomes this receptive and expansive experience. Mentorship is not about solving your problems for you. It's literally about that feedback.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the
Yeah.
upgrade in consciousness and that actually, it goes back to the what I was saying about doing the chemical dependency work where it's like there's in that lens, there's different stages like pre-contemplation, contemplation, all of that, like actually ready for change. And so there are times when counsel's not the best
Not
fit,
appropriate. Yeah.
like
Exactly.
if you're just thinking about change and you don't really, you're not really ready, you're still contemplating whether change is something that could be good for you. Like, no, don't,
Yeah.
don't
Yeah.
invest.
Don't waste your money. Yeah.
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 But when you're hungry and you're ready, like, like you just know deep in your bones, even if there is a little fear, then that's when it's like it's like a really beautiful thing because of what we're talking about with the relational aspect and that deep ability to trust and really being able to trust someone that deeply is a reflection of you deepening the trust in yourself and being able to have um yeah, like to be led and to lead and be led, I think that's a really um a beautiful thing that we're kind of like you're talking about men and women and the battle of battle of the
Battle
sexes
of the
thing. It's like,
sexes.
yeah,
Yeah.
I think we're finally in that place where it's becoming like
A
more
little more
common.
fluid. Uh-huh.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's a cool spot because I think we're going to see a lot more coming together. And I don't think that it's even just man and woman. I think it's also elder, like I do value wisdom that I don't have.
Hmm.
I don't think I would have gotten here if I didn't value things outside of me that were presented to me just at the right time. And also, I think we're moving out of the pain paradigm to love rooted, which, sometimes people think I got to hit the bottom before I can make a change. That's a lie.
Mm. Yeah,
It's a
yeah,
lie.
definitely don't have to,
You
but
don't
a lot
have
of
to,
people wait until they
right?
do.
Because it's a much harder thing to recover from per se, because you have to then, like, there's pathways that happens when you torment yourself, like that's the truth from a brain capacity. But I think we're moving into a place where people are just not willing to sit and be tortured anymore.
Yeah,
and
right.
and
And
I
a good
don't
thing.
want to do that. Yeah, it's a good thing. And so I think what I've always been curious about, because we've been living in the pain paradigm for so long, as we move into a love rooted paradigm. And when I say love, I don't mean it just feels good and you're fucking rainbows and sunshine all day long. Love is a very truthful experience, which is not always what you want it to be. But it allows for a deeper level of expansion in a more rapid pace because there's nothing to recover from.
Yeah.
But you have
No.
you have to have you have to have a level of an awareness where you're able to then look at your environment and go, okay, like, who knows what I don't? What are we doing now? This is where the fun comes in, but I know that it's coming. We anyways,
Yeah.
it's coming. It's coming.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
it is challenging if you haven't had that experience. So you kind of have to like, what's that word? You have to be christened or broken in to at least
Sure.
have that
Broken. Yes. Yes.
first experience of like, okay, this feels awful, but there is something really grand on the other side of that. Like
Yes.
really having that, like you talked about the belief. And as soon as you have that first experience of that, it's like, of course, that can be the new normal. But that first experience, I think, it can be especially bumpy. But there was something you said in there that reminded me of, oh, you're talking about the truth and how it doesn't always, it I think it's like an acquired taste. So
Mm-hmm.
again, if it's your first experience of like unfiltered truth, maybe it can feel a little jarring to of like, whoa, I wasn't expecting that. But over time, it can certainly, and it doesn't have to take a long time, but it can just be like to a place like the more I was de-armoring
Yeah.
I just laugh hysterically sometimes at my
Yeah.
partner when he just drops a truth bomb on me. Like, I'm just like, I love it so much. From the outside looking in, it probably looks like he's being a dick, but
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
just like, give me more. Like, that's
Yeah. Yeah.
hilarious.
Tell me. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I think, there's a certain openness and receptivity of truth. And I think that just depends on where you are in your journey. But I would say, like, the clients that we're attracting, they're really wanting a taste of that. They're wanting more of that because, like, even today I was doing a mastermind, and it's like you can literally drop the truth in 5 seconds and then it's just like game over, like they
Yeah.
just up leveled into a totally
Yeah.
new reality that they didn't have the words or the experience for prior to that, because it goes back to the elder. Like, if you haven't lived it, you're going to be figuring it out kind of
It's
as you
empty.
go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that, based on like what has happened in the coaching industry, and I was, as you were saying that, like you're dropping those bombs of truth and then it just changes for somebody, that can only come from embodiment. And
Mm.
embodiment is not something you can falsify. And if you're around people who are in falsified embodiment, then it will take you longer because no one actually hits it at the depth that it needs to go for it to ring true. And I didn't really understand that until I understood my own impact on people and how I understood the polar opposite of how it was being received when it wasn't truly embodied. There is something about somebody that has walked something and can articulate it in a way from words to body, that when it lands, there is no jagged edge.
Mm.
Like if somebody that I know is not saying something to appear a certain way, articulate it, have power over, dominate, blah, 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 then anybody can receive that because it's not an attack. It's not an attack.
Yeah. I'm scanning because I'm like, I know this to be true. I know this to be, I've had this lived experience, and it feels like there's a nuance. It feels like there's like a disclaimer in there of if someone has very, very thick armors, it's not that it'll be jagged, but it'll feel slightly more jarring.
Yes. But generally speaking,
yeah.
But that truth will hit at some point. So I know you felt this and have experienced this in life. It was part of as being a projector. I could not fucking understand what was going on. But when I was younger, there would be times where I would just say these things and people were just so angry and they were very responsive and reactive to me. And I was like, and that's where my people pleaser was born, because like, it was like, okay, well, if I'm going to disrupt people by telling them the truth, then I might as well protect myself. But what I realized, because over time, every single one of these people would return and be like, that thing you said, you were right. Or I owe you an apology because you were right. There's something about the truth in that nature so there is a very different feeling in depth of somebody who's just taking something that they've learned online and now they're just saying it out loud.
Mm-hmm.
But real truth, whether it hits like a hammer and you're jarring somebody, if they don't get it now, they'll get it tomorrow and they will come back to you.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
I mean? Yeah,
mm-hmm. Yeah.
Whereas
I don't know why.
But somebody who like uses that as a form of, I know this, but I don't actually know this, that will cut like a knife, because then people will question their own validity versus just allowing something to move them.
What do you mean by question their own validity? I think I know what you're saying, but I want to understand.
So it's like being in a room with a bunch of people who've read the same book on how to live your life, and none of them are really living their life, but they're talking a lot about living their life. So then somebody comes in with a real tangible thing that's going on, and then everybody starts like, this is what you do, this is what you do. And then somebody says something off the cuff because they think that that's the right thing to do. They don't actually know if it is. They're not really even invested in the person and what they're actually doing in their life. And that person says that thing and it cuts like a butter knife. Like it comes in and like, oh, well, that doesn't feel good. Like what? Okay, well, am I doing it wrong? Like you guys all seem to be doing okay. Like
I see what you're saying.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Where it's like there's something about that embodied truth where it's like you're not really looking to impact somebody or intellectualize them to death. You're literally just like, okay, this is what it is. And it's a very like, it's not meant to be controversial or like, it doesn't have an agenda. So that when you said like it kind of jars people, the way I see that energetically is like you're spearing them with something really useful to that being. And it doesn't matter when it lands, but when it lands,
Right.
you will be
Yes.
the person they see because that was the embodied delivery.
Yeah, definitely have had that experience. Definitely.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
And then
interesting. Yeah.
it is interesting. And I get, so as you can tell, I've worked with a lot of people with
Mm-hmm.
very thick defenses
Yeah.
because I've talked
Yeah.
about like the addiction and like different populations. And that's not at all where I am now,
Yeah.
mostly. But there are times when I,
That's what mostly. There's still inflection. Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
like there are times when someone's thick defenses can show up, right?
Sure.
And they're just, and so they're like you're saying, there's like this time delay before it can fully be received.
Yeah.
And so that's where my mind was scanning because it's like I see a million a million
Correct.
situations.
Yes. Correct. Yes.
Yeah. So I appreciate all of that. Yeah, so I know we've been jamming for a while now. I'll
Yeah.
let you go
Yeah.
soon, but
I
I am
appreciate that.
curious if there's anything else that you want to say or share, or any edges that you're riding as you're kind of exploring this homecoming season.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
just
mean,
anything.
yeah, this season for me has been all about really letting her out. Like I feel like you get to a place where it's like little particle debris for the next phase of your experience. And I feel like the last year has really been clearing that up and like really just shedding away some of those things so that my voice could be clear and heard and not for any reason. And that's where it becomes fun because it's not contrived or trying to be something it's not, or it's just I get to be me, and that's the best part. And in that,
Yeah.
I get to watch other people be themselves because I think that it's one thing I can say about my work is I allow people to be who they are. And then I absolutely demand the most of them because we want those lives, like I don't care what anyone says, you could be poor your whole life and live a very rich life, but nobody wants that at this point in time. And we may actually be forced into that space again because nature may tell us we fucked up, so like we never really know. But what I will say is having a solidification in terms of your own expression as a human being, which is different. Like you cannot be another person.
Mm-mm.
There's a lot of commonalities, there's community, there's wisdom and all of that, but like you as an individual are it.
Yeah, I think we're in such a beautiful phase right now of, welcomed individuation, and just the more people can lean into that instead of following, I think, yeah, we're just headed for some beautiful territory in that way. So, yeah, I'm
Yeah.
excited to see the things that you're sharing this
Yeah, and
season,
likewise.
and
Yeah.
what you're birthing. And for those watching live or catching the replay, do you want to share where people can find you and any other final words?
Yeah, I mean, I obviously am in the relationship mentorship space. You can find me on Facebook at Jennifer Hallett or online and Instagram, Jayla Loves. All of the links that would be appropriate to that are in both of those bios, and then DM me anytime. Like it's we're all individuated, but I think that what we're seeing now is people coming together, and that is really exciting because it's not, what can you do for me? It's what do you see that I don't know, and how do we make something from that? It's the best. It's honestly the best if you can get on this train because it's going to be fun. Where the world is not maybe so fun as a collective, but what you
Yeah,
contribute
but
can be so different.
there's lots of opportunity to have
There
that
is.
experience. So that's
Exactly.
beautiful. Yeah,
Regardless.
I'll be sure to share your links in the description, and I'll send you the replay too in case you want to
Amazing. Just
play with
share it.
that. And yeah, it was
Yeah,
so
yeah.
good to see you, and I'm
Yes,
sure
you
we'll
too.
talk again soon.
Absolutely.